Hey, this is the Gig Life Podcast. I'm your host, Stevie Taylor. Welcome to a few gig tales. Ever wonder what happens behind the scenes? In this sub-series of the Gig Life Podcast, you'll hear some interesting tales, stories, anecdotes of life on the road, stage and studio, told by the musicians and the artists that were there. Sometimes their names will be changed or removed to protect the innocent and the guilty. Today's episode features 3 stories told by Jackie Barnes. The first 2 stories are about some experiences Jackie had in West Africa while he was studying at Berkley, and the final story is a unique experience at a musical festival in Estonia with the Lachey Doley group. Warning, this episode has some swearing, so listener discretion is advised. So, a few gig tales, episode 3. Here we go.
Yeah, check, 1, 2, telling stories. Story time with Jackie.
Late night with Jack.
Late night at Jackie's place.
All right, man, you're on. You got the floor.
Yeah. Well, good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man. Yeah.
So where do I start? All right. I'm going to start with a story. It would have been about 2008. It was while I was studying at Berkeley. I started taking it was one of those cool things. Going to Berkeley exposed me to so many different kind of, opportunities and different things that I would never have been exposed to had I stayed in Australia. And I was kind of looking through my, class selections for one of my second semester, and I noticed a class that was available for me to select was West African drum and dance, and I just thought, man, that's cool. I want to do that. So I signed up for this class, and anyway, it ended up being like such an amazing class. I met so many cool people through that, and Joe Galeota, the head of the African department at Berkeley, and yeah, it was an awesome class, and I started doing that for a few semesters, and eventually Joe pulled me aside and said, "Oh, look, we're at the end of every school year, I kind of pick 7 to 10 or so students to take to West Africa and have this kind of cultural experience in Ghana, and I'd love you to come." So this was the end of my, I'd say I'd been at Berkeley for about 1.5 years at this point. I'd done 3 semesters, and I was just like stoked to do something like that. I'd never been to Africa before. I thought, this is super cool. Let's do it. And then so organized it all. There's a couple of kind of funny stories that happened during that trip. The first was, I remember Joe was such a stickler about make sure you've got your visas. Have you got your visas? And he'd kind of tell all of us, have you organized your visa yet? And we're like, yeah, we're on it. It's all good. And he was just so pedantic about it. So we it got to the time when we were traveling. We flew from Boston to New York, did our kind of stop over there, and we got to the gate at JFK to fly to Accra in Ghana. And they're doing the immigration before you get on the plane. And anyway, so they're like, everyone's got your visas, and we were all having a laugh. Oh yeah, we got them done. Don't worry, Joe. And anyway, so then they stopped Joe and said, "Where's your visa?" And he opened his up and they said, "Your visa's expired." And so, he'd been so on us to do it, the whole months before this trip, and then his had expired. I think it was something ridiculous, 2 days before the trip, and he just forgot to renew his. So we ended up getting on the plane. There was about 10 of us, I think, 9 or 10 of us, and we're getting on a plane to West Africa. We had to leave Joe behind, so teacher, chaperone, the guy who's organized the trip. We left him in New York, and we're on a plane to West Africa, not knowing, we didn't have our itinerary. What are we doing? Like, what's going to happen? So we're on the plane, like having a laugh and kind of joking about, what's going to happen when we land and who's going to be there. And just kind of, it was a bit of like flying into the unknown. So anyway, we landed in Accra and got off the plane, got our bags and stuff. We were all really excited. And luckily, one of the locals from the village that we were going to study in and stay in, he was there waiting for us, and we were all good. And Joe managed to get his visa sorted, and he joined us at 2-3 days later.
Yeah, that's good.
It was like, it was just, that was a funny start to that trip. But anyway, a couple of days into the trip was the original story I was thinking of telling, and then I thought of that part of it as well. This is it's a crazy story. Anyway, we were a couple of days into the trip, and we went from we ended up driving from Accra a couple of hours towards the Togo border, and we were staying in a small village called Kopea. And it was mud brick housing, no running water, electricity, all that sort of stuff. It was it was like going back into like an ancient time. It was such a cool experience. But we got in the car with some of the villagers and drove further towards the Togo border to this little beachside town. I don't remember the town's name, but we were, basically just playing football on the beach and, having a bit of a fun day. And anyway, I remember this day distinctly. It was like really crazy surf to the point where like the waves had eaten kind of away at the sand, and there was this big kind of like 6-foot drop that you have to jump off to get into the water. And I remember going for a quick swim and going, man, these rips are just absolutely crazy. I'm not going to go like right in.
Yeah.
Even as a good swimmer, as a scuba diving instructor and that, I was like, no, I don't feel confident swimming in this. It's like pretty dangerous. So we were kind of just like, throwing a ball around like in the shallows, having a bit of fun, like pushing each other around. And I kind of was just, one point I was just staring out to sea, and I kind of dug my left leg into the sand to stop myself from being dragged around because it was like quite violent water. And then out of nowhere, I just got one of my mates tackled me from behind, and I had no idea it was coming. And he's one of my best mates, Michelle, and the big Brazilian guy is pretty similar size to me actually. And he clattered me, and my leg was in the sand, and I felt a pop. And then I couldn't move. I felt like a pop in this like crack. And my first thought was, oh man, he's broken my back. Because I just couldn't move. And I was like getting washed around the water to like come to the surface. And, being a bit of a joker, everyone was I could hear people laughing, but then I got sucked under the water and then like didn't surface. And then Michelle tells me now, he's like, man, I was saying like, dude, where are you? And eventually I was like, help. And they realized that I was actually in a spotted bother, and they kind of dragged me out of the water. And then, they had to, I couldn't stand, couldn't walk. And they started to dig a kind of channel in that kind of 6-foot drop to drag me up onto the actual, sand. Then kind of started to assess what had happened, and turns out he'd completely dislocated my hip.
Oh, jeez.
So my left hip had popped out and was just kind of, I could feel this lump, and I was just like, oh my God. So then I was starting to go into shock, and there's actually photos on Facebook of all the group like jumping around me and taking photos, selfies and stuff while I'm sitting there just screaming in pain.
Classy.
And just thinking like we're in a small village, like a rural village on the border of Ghana and Togo.
Yeah.
And like who knows where the nearest hospital is. And anyway, so then our chaperone had gone to try and find help because our car had gone back to the village, which was about a 45-minute drive away. And then just by chance, this guy happened to be like pushing this cart down the beach with some vegetables on it to take it to a local market. So our guys negotiated with him, gave him some money, and they put me on the cart amongst the veggies. And it was like one of those things, like the wheels were different size. So when they were pushing it, it was like kind of jumping around, and I was screaming because every time the wheels turned, it would like bump, and it was like bumpy on the sand as well. I was like, why would you wheel a cart down a beach? Like, but anyway, they wheeled me like a couple hundred meters down the beach and into this village. And they found this kind of like random doctor, like, it was really bizarre. Like, I just remember, like, he didn't speak any English. He spoke because Ghana's an English speaking country, but Togo's French. So I noticed he was talking French, and I speak fluent French, so I was able to communicate with him. But before I knew it, they had me on this table in this room of this guy's house on the border of Togo and Ghana. And the next thing, I feel them injecting me with something, and I'm like freaking out, like, dude, what the fuck?
What, no consent?
What, no consent. They just jabbed me with something. I was like, what the fuck was that? And then within like, I don't know, like 2 minutes, my whole, like, from my belly down was just completely numb.
Oh, jeez.
Which was great because I was in so much pain.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, what do they inject me with? And I'm in like a village in West Africa. And I'm just injected by a dude in his like in his house. So I was kind of like, and then he was like trying to kind of like, he was pulling my leg around, trying to get it back into place, and wasn't working. Eventually he just said, he gave me a strip of painkillers. Here, take this. You're going to have to get to the hospital in Accra, in the capital, which is like a 4-hour drive away, but you're going to have to get there eventually. And so then when the car came, the car turned up, took us back to the village where we were staying, and like there's photos. It's hilarious. Like there's photos of one of the dancers in the village doing handstands on my back, trying to push my hip back in, and like I'm like grimacing in pain. Like it was just crazy. Like I spent the next week and a half or so just like, playing the drums to keep my mind off the pain, and like, learning and studying their culture. Yeah. I had an incredible time. I was in so much pain, but it was like such an amazing trip. Yeah. And like every day this guy would do handstands on me, trying to push my hip back in. Someone else would grab me and try and kind of pull the hip joint back in, and to no avail. And it was only after a couple of weeks we went to a few different parts of Ghana. We ended up in Accra, back in the capital. And finally I just said to Michelle, look, man, I'm in so much pain. While my hip was out, I did like a rainforest canopy walk where we like were 100 meters above the ground in like on these like little kind of rope bridges and stuff, and I was like doing all this hobbling around with my hip out, and eventually got to a point a couple of weeks into the trip where I was like, no, I'm just in too much pain. I need to go to the hospital. Someone needs to take me to Accra. Yep. So they organized a car. Michelle like insisted on coming with me because he felt so bad about messing up my hip. And we got to the capital, got to the hospital. There was a doctor there who had studied in America. Immediately, the first thing she said was, don't put your hip back in. I'm like, oh, people have been like, probably 10 different people have been trying to push it back in for like 2 weeks. And she's like, it's a good thing they didn't, because there's quite a common thing to happen when you dislocate your hip is for the major artery that runs down your leg to get caught in between the joint and the hip bone. And when you pop it back in, if that's in the way, you'll internally bleed out and die. So I was like, okay, maybe we shouldn't put the hip back in.
Couple of weeks in.
And she said, look, I can do the scans now, and we can relocate your hip here, but you're probably going to be staying here for an extra couple of weeks. And I was like, look, and she said, and it's going to probably be more than your insurance for your travel insurance probably isn't going to cover it, all this sort of stuff. And I was like, I don't really want to be in a, local hospital in West Africa doing like, major stuff. So she was like, my recommendation is go home, fly home, end your trip, go back home where you can go see your specialist in your country, and it'll be covered by your medical, insurance. And so I then ended the trip early. It was meant to be a 3.5 week trip. I ended it after just over 2 weeks. Flew, Accra back to New York, Boston, San Fran, Sydney, an economy about 46-hour trip with my hip dislocated. Got back, got the scans done, then finally saw my specialist, and he said, the artery's out of the way, let's get it back in. And within like 5 minutes, straight back in. Man. And it was the biggest relief once it went back in. It was like, it was so good. And I've surprisingly had very little issues from it since. There wasn't much in terms of ligament damage or scar tissue. I do feel the aches and pains occasionally, but for the most part, it was a full recovery. But it was out of the joint for a couple of weeks. And pretty damn uncomfortable, but
well done.
But it's still one of the best trips I've ever been on in my life.
That's
and
cool.
one of the best musical experiences I've had in my life.
Fantastic.
In Ghana with a dislocated hip.
Fantastic. That's great, man.
So this is what year was this? We're going back a couple of years now. I think 2017, I think it was. And I was on tour with the Lachey Doley group around Europe. It was one of the first big European tours I did with Lachey over there. And it was a really, really kind of long, amazing, frustrating, tiring, exhausting, incredible tour. Like, it was one of those tours, we were there for, the better part of 3 months, I think it was. And, driving around in a pretty uncomfortable van. I think we clocked about 25,000 Ks in those couple of months. Just driving around Europe, doing incredible shows, but like crazy shit happened on that tour. And the first story that comes to mind happened towards the end of the tour. Like, we were pretty ragged by then and pretty tired, and we'd just kind of done a little run in southern Italy, where like our van got broken into, some stuff got stolen out of the van. We were down in kind of Calabria, which is a pretty unforgiving place. But then we went to Sicily, and it was super cool. We got ripped off on the ferry going over there. But played some really incredible shows in some incredible places. But then we had this fly date in Estonia in between Italy and, like, I think it was Switzerland or something like that. And we flew from Italy to Estonia, got picked up by these guys that take us to, we stayed in Tallinn, in the capital, and then we went down to to a place called Haapsalu, about an hour and a half, I think it was, outside of Tallinn, to play this festival, Augusti Blues, which is a blues festival, one of the biggest ones in that part of Europe, in Northern Europe. And it was super cool. Like, we were so pumped because we'd looked into the festival. We knew that the site was at this kind of like old castle that was kind of in ruins, and it was like just a super cool place to play music. And we were just absolutely pumped. We were playing. We were like I think we were second to last before Eric Gales, who's incredible. So we were pumped for that as well. And we got there in the afternoon, and there was a band on before us that was a Ukrainian blues band. And I remember standing side stage looking at the singer. I was like, man, this guy is enormous. Like, he had gigantism. So, he had the really big protruding forehead and was like, kind of looked like,
Andre the Giant, or
like Lurch or something like that.
Oh, what's that? Jaws off the the James Bond movie. What's his name?
Yeah.
I got it. I got the picture.
Yeah, so he kind of looked like that, and he kind of the guitar looked like a like a ukulele on him because he was so big. And they weren't a particularly good band, but they were just like a, pretty straight ahead blues band. And we were kind of just walking around the festival having fun, and they were, they were singing a version of Blues is My Business and Business is Good, but they changed the words to Love is My Business and Business is Good. And we were kind of having a laugh at that, kind of, just enjoying the festival and kind of having a laugh. And anyway, we kind of started to make our way back towards the stage, and we got stopped at the merch desk, and we were doing some signatures. And then suddenly there was silence, and we're like, oh, that's weird. They're only like, 25, 30 minutes or 20 minutes into their set or something. And we're like, it's weird that they've stopped. And the crowd was real quiet. We're like, oh, they're not getting a cheer. Anyway, and then we finished our signatures, and we kind of looked up at the stage and realized that the singer had collapsed on the stage, and they were performing CPR on him.
Oh, fuck.
And we were like, fuck. So we ran backstage, and they kind of cordoned off the backstage. We were kind of then then they brought the ambulances in to try and kind of, look after him, and which blocked our route in or out. So we were just back in this like tiny backstage area with a clear view of them working on him on the stage. And it must have been, I reckon it was probably at least 3 hours they worked on him on the stage, and then they took him away, and he died.
Fuck.
And then, so we were kind of just like sitting there, like we heard that he passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital in Tallinn, and we're like, just like, oh my God. And we were sitting there with this other 3-piece blues. So there was another blues band on before us, and then us, and then they, like, the organizers about an hour after that. So everything's been delayed by like 3-4 hours, and finally the organizers, like, the crowd stayed silent. They didn't kind of boo, cheer. They were just like kind of just stood where they were. No one left. It was just kind of like everyone was in this kind of limbo, kind of thinking, what the fuck is going on? And then eventually the organizer of the festival came up to the blues band, us and the blues band next to us who were going on next, and said, all right, the stage is yours. and it was kind of like, we were like, do we and the band, the 3-piece band, went on and did like a 20-minute set, and they came off, and they were kind of like, that was weird. And then they were like, okay, the stage is yours. And we're like, this is like, obviously, we're a band that kind of thrives off like energy and like enjoyment, and like we want to have a good time, but is it wrong to have a good time? Like, we were just like, this feels like, it feels really strange. And we went on stage, and the crowd was so incredible and receptive, and we ended up having an incredible show. But in the back of our minds was like, this is like, man, it's crazy that we were like, a couple of hours ago, the singer just fucking dropped dead on the stage. Like,
yeah.
And so we played our show. It was an amazing show. We had a great time, but it was kind of, it was just a bizarre thing. And then Eric Gales went on and absolutely shredded it, absolutely killed it. It was incredible. And we flew out of Estonia the next day with this kind of like, man, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah, yeah.
You'd
kind of want to skip the after party, eh? Because fuck.
And like, because we were like for hours, like a couple of hours there, we were with we were kind of consoling the bandmates of him, because the band were like off the stage by that point when they were working on him. We were just we didn't know these guys, and they didn't really speak much English. They were from Ukraine, and they just we were just offering the support. And it was just a crazy thing to happen on towards the end of a really intense tour. We'll never forget that. It was just a crazy thing to happen. I'd never seen anyone die on stage. Mm-hmm. I've heard of stories of musicians dropping on stage, and it's like, you never think you'll see it, especially at a celebratory festival in summer in Europe. And
fuck.
Crazy story, man.
Yeah, man.
It was crazy. It was, yeah.
So I don't mean, I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just, I'm kind of shocked by it. But like when that stage manager or the organizer came up and said, "Oh, you guys are going to keep playing," did you like go through your set list and go, "Well, let's kind of look at the songs we're playing and
luckily
the vocal's going to be sing."
Luckily, we weren't playing like "Lonely Teardrops" by Jackie Wilson or something. My heart is crying.
Yeah.
Which actually, I heard that the story is that he collapsed on stage after singing that line.
Jesus.
And went into a coma for 10 years and then died. So, yeah, luckily we didn't have any songs about heart attacks or, but yeah, but we just kind of were more like, oh, we're going on. And the crowd hadn't moved. Like no one had left. There was still like, probably 10,000 people there just kind of. And you couldn't ask for a cooler setting. Like I posted a photo, a throwback to it a couple of days ago on my Instagram, and it just popped up on my memories, and I was like, oh man, what a crazy day that was. But man, like 10,000 people, this stage set up next to this incredible old like castle ruins. It was like, and I'd always wanted to go to Estonia, and it was like, it was super cool. The people were great. The festival was really well organized. The sound was great. It was all apart from that fucking tragedy was a really awesome festival. But got to stay professional, right? Well, it was just crazy. Yeah. Here the stage is yours. I'm like, fuck.
Yep.
Do we enjoy this or do we and we just like, you know what? The show must go on.
Yep.
You just got to,
later. Yep.
And it's one of those things, you just got to get on with it. And we were like, well, let's just go and fucking rock out for our fallen comrade.
Yeah, man. Wow. I hope you dug those 3 stories from Jackie. For more information on Jackie Barnes, see the links in the show notes. Stay tuned for a few Gig Tales episode 3. If you have a gig tale and you want to share it, get in touch with me via the socials. Links also down in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, share, rate and review, and you can also donate or leave a tip. That's it from me. Catch you soon, Cheers.